Welcome to the Sober Nation FM podcast, where we're putting recovery on the map. I'm your host, Jonathan Sylvester. This show is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Do you want to take your recovery to the next level? Do you want more support, community, and fellowship? Sobriety Engine is an incredible community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. You can get a ton of great tips, resources, and guidance to help you succeed in recovery and in life. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. Sober Nation FM is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle, all while supporting your sobriety, then you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends. Follow, subscribe, and leave a review. Nation, let's hop right into today's episode. Today, I'll be speaking with the founder of Sober Nation, Tim Stoddart. Thanks for coming on the show, Tim.
Great to be here, Jonathan. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we've got a lot to talk about, man. But I'd like to start off here by just keeping it simple and having you share a little bit about what things were like before you got sober and how you found your way into recovery.
Getting right to it, sure. My story before I got sober is similar to what most people's are. I thought it started off really great, actually. I always laugh when people say oh, it was just terrible. There was nothing good about it. I don't think that's true. I had a great time.
For sure.
I was always like a thrill seeker. I was always pretty adventurous. And at the same time, though, I was always like a really reserved person. And till this day, I feel like I'm still kind of awkward and just like a little weird, I guess. Right. So it felt good. I forget what they call like social lubricant. That's what it was, So
Sure.
when I was a kid, it felt really good to have something that could give me just some ease into going into social conversations and going into like experiences that I otherwise would have been crawling out of my skin. Right. So
Yeah.
it was a kind of a dichotomy between the two things. On one side of me, like I was always uncomfortable. I was always just sort of crawling out of my skin a little bit. Like, people just don't want to be around me. People know if I come around, and I bet they're laughing at me when I'm not there. Or, like when you walk into a room and people are laughing and you automatically think they're laughing about you.
Right.
Like I had that feeling just all the time. But on the other side, there was like the thrill seeker part of me, and I had a great time until I didn't, and when I wasn't having a great time anymore, like it was not fun, and it was terrible. Obviously it had to be for me to be willing to make such like a drastic change in my life
For sure.
in getting sober. So it was all fun and games until opiates got introduced into my life. And I'm not saying that other drugs like aren't serious. Like I had a terrible cocaine problem, and in a lot of ways cocaine really affected my health the worst out of anything, just because I'm already like pretty high metabolism person. But when you throw like cocaine and Adderall in there, like I was just super malnourished
Sure.
But like the point I'm trying to make is when opiates and that other world, because I'm from Philadelphia, and in just the same in a lot of cities, they have really, really terrible drug problems and heroin problems and opiate problems. I'm not saying that Philly is like special by any means, but clearly there's like a center point of heroin addiction and opiate addiction in Philadelphia. And so like once I fell into that other side of it, it wasn't just partying and having a good time anymore. And when that started happening, it happened fast. And I find that in my experience, it always happens fast when you talk to people who, kind of cross that imaginary line into that just constant full scale obsession. No matter what, this is the most important thing in my life. So there's plenty of instances where I look back and I have fond memories, for sure. There's plenty of instances where I look back and I look at the pain and like kind of like feel ashamed of a lot of the things I did and how I acted. And so I see both sides of it, but nonetheless, like this way is certainly better. At least it has been for me.
Yeah, I'd agree wholeheartedly with that. So, we've chatted a little bit before and talked about your story a bit. If you would, could you kind of fill us in because I know there was a moment with your mom
Yeah.
that I think was a big part of your shift, kind of towards getting sober and just maybe that rock bottom or kind of part of that starting that momentum into recovery. What was family life like and what was going on with all of that?
Yeah, and I well, I don't love talking about it, but I always
Sure.
feel kind of privileged to talk about it because
Hmm.
I find that other people can relate to this a lot. So, uh, family life. My family is great. I always say that I've heard in the rooms and I've heard with other people's stories that like they didn't feel loved or whatever, and I never felt that way.
Okay.
Like my family is just full of love, still is, full of
That's awesome.
support. Um, it was just hard, like my parents had me at a very, very young age, and it was just really hard. And you don't know it when you're like a kid, right? But when you get older, you start to put things together. I was like, damn, like we're really struggling. So
Mm.
so my relationship with my dad was always great. Like I looked at him like a hero and still do. And today's Father's Day, and happy Father's Day to my pop, like dude's the man. Oh, and happy almost Father's Day to you, by the way, Jonathan.
Almost there, man.
Yeah, almost there. um, and my mother is like the most caring person ever. I mean, she was a inner city ER nurse, and like it's just where she thrives. She just loves to ease suffering, I guess is the best way to put it. And my parents worked all the time. They worked their asses off, and they had me so young that they basically like sacrificed their entire youth and their 20s just to like raise my sister and I, right? And I didn't appreciate it at the time, but as I got older and had some time, I was able to actually look back at it and be like, wait, it's not that they were like neglecting me, it's that they were taking care of me, right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so you know when my mom got sick, it was scary, as anybody can imagine. I'm sure people listen to this have maybe lost parents or lost loved ones, and it was like a really terrible point in my life. But basically what happened, I don't know if I told the story with you before, but I'll tell it again for people
Yeah.
listening.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, my mom got a very, very rare brain disorder, basically is the best way to put it. So like she she I'll save everybody like the medical technicalities just because I
Yeah.
learned about it so much. But at the end of the day, she ended up with like a big ball of like hardened, coagulated blood, kind of like a brain tumor, but it wasn't cancerous. It was just like a mass of blood that
Wow.
clotted in her brain, and it landed right on top of her brain stem. And when that happens, like your brain stem is kind of the part of your lizard brain, right? It's just
Mhm.
the bare bones. You need this thing to function. So
Yeah.
really quickly overnight, she developed almost like stroke like symptoms. Like her one eye kind of started pointing the other way, and she had been talking a lot about like numbness in her arm, and
Mm.
uh and yeah, looking back at it, like you wish you would have done something sooner, but we weren't really sure what to make of it, especially because my mom broke her neck like 5 years before. So she healed from that, and like that was very painful. And I remember the recovery process. But the point is just like nerve stuff, right? Like I had back surgery
Right.
not too long ago, and so it's difficult to see at the time the difference between like something was happening and just like pain in your arm and your side because of nerves, and like we just didn't see it. And then, like I said, one day we woke up. One day my mom woke up and she called me, and she was living in Germantown. I drove over to Germantown, and it was a shock just to see what happened overnight. And so long story short, this particular brain disorder, there's only a couple surgeons in the world that like really even operated on it. Last time we checked, there was only even like 100 or so, maybe 1,000 documented cases of this happening. So this
Wow.
surgeon was all the way in Stanford in California, and we flew out there, and my mom was scheduled for surgery. And the moment when it like really happened was the day before surgery, because I had flown from Phoenix and then Phoenix to San Francisco, and they picked me up at the airport. And so in total, it was probably like 9 hours of traveling.
Hmm.
And, you know, I was an addict, and I was withdrawing basically. And anybody that can experience it, it doesn't take long. And so I was just like, I was very sick, you know, like
Yeah.
just physically sick. I was just really, really sick. And I was too scared kind of to hide drugs in my shoe or something. And so I just put them in the pill bottle and I picked it back up in the hotel room basically when I got there. And like right when I got there, my mom walked into the room, and my stepdad, her boyfriend at the time, now her husband, was kind of pushing her in the wheelchair. And she told me that the next morning they were going to have the pre-op with the surgeon, and it was pretty simple. They were just going to talk her through the process. Like, you know, the way my mom explained it to me, they were just going to have a picture or like one of those little models of her brain, and kind of just explain like, this is where we're going to cut in, and you know, this is like where the mass is, and you know, we're going to do it through here or whatever. Just a standard pre-op procedure for
Right.
like a
Yeah.
really difficult operation. And my mom just asked, she was like, will you come with me? And you got to understand, I'm my mom's firstborn son. Even in my family with all my aunts and uncles, like I'm the first of my generation. So I'm the oldest across family wide. And so me and my mom were really close. And even like my aunts and uncles, I'm pretty close to a lot of them in age, right? So even though she's my mom and I'm her son, we still had a little bit tighter of, you know, like a friendship, so to speak, like a supportive relationship with each other, just because we were so close. And I was so sick at the time. I said, no, mom, like I probably can't do it. I'm not feeling good, just because I was so desperate to like ease those withdrawals, you know? And
Hmm.
so she left the room, and it was that night, excuse me. I think I said it was the morning. It was that evening that she had the pre-op, because her surgery was in the morning. And so I just remember going through my suitcase and doing what I had to do, and kind of just looking out this window, still clear as day. I think this is even the part that I explained to you last time, and just looking out this window in Stanford and seeing just this field and these big trees, and just knowing like, wow, I just let my mom down, and like she might die tomorrow. And just it wasn't the bottom that I had before. Like I had really serious consequences before,
Right.
like as a lot of people had, just serious legal consequences, like physical consequences, and getting beat up, and
Right. Right.
like it was bad. But it was just that real like emotional bottom where like I saw what I had become, that drove me to just I don't know if I was ready to get sober yet. I didn't even really know what sobriety was, frankly, at
Sure.
that time. But that was just the first like realization I had. It was like, man, something's got to change, and it was a big moment for me.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty powerful. And your mom, how is she doing now?
Oh, she's alive. She's making the most of it. You know, like she
That's
definitely
awesome.
still has some symptoms, and her mobility isn't the same, but it's just amazing over the years, the little things that happen. You know, like I remember 2 or 3 years ago, she got into an Uber for the first time, like by herself,
Hmm.
just to go. She lives in a part of Philly now. It's called Roxborough, and it's very hilly. I mean, like very hilly. There's like a bike race every year in Philadelphia that goes through it. And when they go through Roxborough, there's this one part of the bike race that they call the Wall. It's up Lyceum Street, and it's like,
Straight up.
yeah, straight up, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Like you see these guys start riding their bike up there, and you're like, why are you doing that? but but the point I'm trying to make is like those hills make it difficult for my mom. And
Okay.
so at that time, oh shoot, sorry, my dog's busting in here. And so at that time, she made the choice and like built up the courage to get in the Uber and do some stuff on her own. And so she makes little victories like that every day. And like, I'm really
That's
proud of her
awesome.
and really happy for her.
Fast forward here a little bit. So you have this moment, and I get what you're saying. I mean, because I definitely had, I'm sure a lot of listeners can relate, like multiple rock bottoms, trouble with the law, financial stuff, relationships and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, like that emotional rock bottom where you are just directly faced with the person you become
Yeah.
and the decisions that you're making, and you're really able to see like, man, this thing has me. And for me, I know it's just this moment of like being exhausted, just definitely feeling, I could see life was unmanageable, but definitely feeling completely powerless over this addiction. So we fast forward a little bit. How did you actually get into recovery? Because you said at the time you didn't really know what sobriety looked like. I mean, how did your recovery journey actually start?
My dad and my uncle were the first ones to really just offer me help. Like, everybody knew, it's not like it was some secret, but we had real problems in my family at the time. Like my father was trying to make some changes in his life, and obviously my mom was sick. And uh at that time, my sister was a really good swimmer in PA. She's actually like a state champ swimmer, and I love bragging about that. But like, everybody had stuff going on in their lives, so it was difficult to find exactly when the right moment was to address how sick I had become. And so like, when we got home and we got back to Philly, my dad and my uncle asked if I would go over to watch a soccer game. I think it was Manchester was playing, because my family's from Scotland, and so
Okay.
they love soccer, as do I. And like, I knew what was about to happen, right? It's not like it was some top secret intervention. It was just like, hey, man, you want to come over and hang out for a little bit and, maybe talk about some things. And so I remember going over there a little bit prepared to like have this
Mm.
conversation. But I still remember getting a little angry and upset when they said that they thought like I needed to get help and that they had found a facility for me. And they wanted me to get treatment. I wasn't expecting that.
Mm.
I was just expecting, I don't know, like, not that, and it was this place called Today Incorporated, and it was in Newtown. And I last time I checked, it actually burnt down by a fire, which is sad because this place uh was like an amazing, amazing place, especially with, I'm not knocking it by any means, but what treatment has become, simply because of like the demand of treatment over the last
Mhm.
15 years. There's so many people that need help.
Yeah.
And when that happens, the infrastructure that has been built around it um, makes it so that, in my opinion, a lot of times we lose these little gems, right? These tiny little facilities that are
Mhm.
just regular people that have been like AA guys for the last 20 years and have this idea like, hey, maybe I can open up a house and like find a doctor that can help me. And the place that I went to was very much like that. It was an old like Revolutionary War, I think, Underground Railroad building, and like the floors were all crooked and it just smelled of old wood. And the guy, my counselor, his name was Ken, and he really, really was the first one to like just make me see the truth and make me see
Mhm.
that I didn't have to keep fighting this giant battle. And when we talked about before, when you asked me the question of when was that moment, I
Yeah.
remember about 4 or 5 days in, him looking at me and be like, but you know that you can't drink or anything anymore when you get out of here. I kind of
Mm.
remember like, what? Like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, not even really getting it, I was just like,
Yeah.
I'm here
Yeah.
because I have a terrible drug problem
Right.
and I got to do something so that like I stop throwing up on the weekends.
Mhm.
And maybe that was the seed. And I think about that moment a lot because I did. My instant reaction to that moment was this combination of like denial, but also like willingness to just listen to it. Like, I don't know how to explain it. I guess for you, because you're a fitness guy like me, this is a good example when like you can't get an exercise or something, and then maybe you watch a video and you see that like your technique is just a little bit off, right? And like if you just switch this one little thing, you could get it, and then you're like,
Mm,
oh, and you try it off and it clicks. It was kind of one
yeah,
of those weird moments where like I hated that he said it, and I hated that he even brought it up. Like I was almost insulted, but still there was this tiny tiny little thing in my brain going like, well, like would that be bad? Like would that really be that
right.
terrible? Not
Yeah.
not drinking anymore. Um so yeah, like that was a big moment for me too.
Yeah. No, I get that, man, because I think like, and you know, I don't want to say I try to talk about this a lot, but I think probably a lot of people can relate. I didn't think I had an issue with alcohol, but I had, a few moments kind of like you just described, just conversations basically. No one like talking at me or anything, just
Mm.
conversations with people, other people that had been through this deal that really understood it. We were able to kind of connect on that level. And what I was finally able to see is just like, okay, maybe alcohol wasn't the first thing that I went to, but when the drugs weren't around, it was almost like I needed something. And a lot of the times it was alcohol.
Hmm.
And so I would get to a point with the alcohol where it would just be like, all right, like, who am I kidding here? Let me get what I really want. So, like, the alcohol, the main issue with it is that it always led back to the drugs. And I think that's where things finally clicked for me. It was like, fine, okay, maybe alcohol isn't the thing you really want initially, but it's part of the problem. And if it was like you're saying, like, I didn't like hearing that, like, I wasn't going to be able to drink again, or that I shouldn't drink again, but it would probably prevent me going back to the drugs. And so I was finally just like, man, why even risk it then? So you're in this treatment center, the seed is planted, you get out of there at some point, and what do things look like from there?
Well, um yeah, great question. And like an important part of my journey that I feel like sometimes gets skipped over. I told you the first place I went to was back to my mom's. I had to basically like tell my landlord that I wasn't going to be able to pay the rent, and I had to shut down my lease or whatever. And he was actually a really good guy. Total side conversation, but like I called him and made an amends to him, and we had a really great conversation, and he said kind things about me. So I
Mm,
just bring that up. That was one of those things at the moment where like I just felt such shame and like embarrassment, like wow, I
yeah.
basically had to get kicked out of my apartment. But so my mom was in Germantown. The first place I went to was my mom's, and it really really didn't take long. Like it's there is something to the people, places, and things, right? Because
Sure.
instantly, I remember there's a Wawa on Allen's Lane on Germantown Avenue, and I was walking to it, and just seeing the buses drive by, and I got out of treatment. It was in like late September, so or no, late, yeah, early October, late September, and the buses were driving by, and there was like a cold rain, and
Oh man.
yeah, and
Yep.
like I could just
Little
hear
too
like the
familiar.
say again.
Little too familiar.
That's exactly what. And I could hear. I remember when this bus drove by, and I could hear like that sound the tires make when they go through those tiny little puddles on the side of the
Hmm.
road. And there was just something there that I felt instantly really like, man, like I don't feel as cool and confident as I did yesterday, and it happened really quick. And so I called Ken. I called that guy Ken, and I just basically told him, I was like, "Look, I don't know what's going on right now. Um, I'm back home." And it was so funny because I remember he instantly said, "Like, did you get high?" And I was just like, "What the fuck?" I was like, "No, that's why I'm calling you, dude. Like, why would you ask me that?" And then like looking back
How
at it,
dare you, sir?
yeah, yeah, exactly. And then looking back at it, thinking of how many times people probably did, and then called him
Mm,
afterwards. Because I remember just being like, "What are you talking about? Like, why would you ask me that?" But
yeah.
um, and and he said, well, I there's a place in Florida you could go to. My roommate at the treatment center, who I built a pretty friendly relationship with, went to Florida, and he I didn't know that Florida had this recovery community. He just said Florida, and I remember realizing that I have a cousin who was the NA guy, and he was almost 3 years clean at the time. And so I said, you know what, let me call you back. And I called my cousin, and Brian and I were close enough, like he lived in Florida, so he wasn't in Philly with like the rest of the family. Like I never saw him at barbecues or whatever, but
Right.
I saw him from time to time, and we knew each other. I called him. I was like, hey man, I don't know how to say this. Can I come sleep on your couch? And he said yes. And when I got there, he was really just explaining to me about this community, like I said. And that same kid, Rob, who I was roommates with in the treatment center, that Ken kind of said, hey, Rob went down to Florida. You might want to check that out. I called
Mhm.
him, and he said he was staying at this really cool sober living facility. And my cousin basically fronted me the $150 for the first week. And they put me up in there, and I got a contracting job because I was building houses at the time, and I worked in the blistering South Florida heat, doing not as fun work because houses in Florida are basically built with steel framing, and I really loved like the 2x4s and cutting the wood and swinging the hammer and
Yeah.
stuff. So I was miserable for the first year doing it, but I showed up every day, and I got a paycheck every week, and I paid my rent, and I would play basketball with my friends at the halfway house every day. And slowly time ticked by, and I'd be catching the bus on my way home from work, and I'd be dirty and like gross, but I would just notice like I don't feel like terrible anymore.
Yeah.
I there's places I want to go, and I know I'm not like living up to my full potential right now, but it was through that contracting job, and through those hours in the heat, and through just the early mornings jumping on the bus and coming home and playing basketball. And the first time I was able to just kind of be in my spot and just let my life kind of settle and
Mhm.
land somewhere, as opposed to always just zooming around and bouncing. I feel like I was missing out on something and feeling like there was somewhere else I needed to be. And so that was really like when I turned the corner. And somewhere in that first year, well, 6 months really, I was at the halfway house like 6 months somewhere, but I kept working at the contracting company for a little while afterwards. But it was really somewhere in that 6 month time period that my brain flipped, where it said, you know what, this is the way I want to live my life.
That's awesome. Yeah. No, man, and I actually didn't remember last time we spoke, that you were getting into like you were doing like manual labor and stuff like I was. And honestly, man, I think that was kind of the perfect job for me. It was like I don't want to say it was
So
mindless, but like I had to be somewhere at a certain time, and it was easy enough to where I didn't have to like I guess think too much. It was just like here's this, do this,
that's
like
it.
real simple. And yeah, but I think one thing that I struggled with was looking at other people. I think it was like on social media, basically, like seeing like friends I had grown up with. They were having kids, they had great jobs, they were doing this, they were doing that. I think that was one of the things that I kind of struggled a little bit with early on in sobriety. And I always like to ask because, obviously, if I hear someone else has dealt with something and they got through it, then that's helpful to me. What do you think one of the biggest things that you struggled with early on in sobriety was?
I think one of my biggest fears was boredom,
Oh yeah,
really.
yeah.
And I really mean that. And I think people should say that more often,
Hmm.
because like if it if being sober meant I would have been bored, I I don't think I would have stayed sober.
Yeah,
Because like why would anybody, right?
yeah,
Like what
100%.
yeah, why would anybody? And that was a big fear of mine. Some of the struggles I had were struggles that I still have, frankly, but at that time they were just so magnified. Just I, I didn't have anything to cancel my insecurities, you know, and it was tough for me. I mean, luckily I always kind of felt comfortable being a loner, and I'm not by any means saying that like the way I handled it was healthy. In fact, I would probably say the opposite. But for me, in my experience, you know, almost just like you said with the manual labor thing, like luckily I had some skilled labor, you know, so like I knew how to do things that is more than just like picking up rocks and moving it from this pile to the
Right,
other.
right.
You know, like I
Yeah.
really knew and still do know the skill of contracting. But if my job was to pick up rocks and move it from one side to the other, like I would have done it,
Mm,
because it was this time for me to just be alone and almost like not care about anything else, right? Like
yeah.
I just I knew, especially with I had a sponsor at the time that I started talking to, and I just was at peace, at least the best that I could be, with knowing that this is gonna go by, and 6 months, a year from now, maybe I can start making some better relationships, and maybe I could be getting more involved, you know. But like for right now, I just I got into a little bit of like a spiritual hole almost. And
Mm,
again, like I'm not saying that this is the way to do it. In fact, for most people it's probably the opposite, but I just knew that the things I struggled with the most in terms of being around other people, you know, and caring what people thought about me and just feeling like a loser,
yeah.
the thing that worked for me was almost just pulling away from all of that. And you know, I read a lot, and I love to read, and I've always loved to read. And I've been one of those nerdy kids my whole life. Like I've read a ton of comic books, and you know, I still love Batman and you know, like magic cards. I found a couple people in Florida that were just into that same kind of shit that I was into. But the biggest struggle, like the point I'm getting at, is the biggest struggle for me also turned out to be like a therapeutic experience for me.
Mm,
Was just that angst, you know, like everywhere
yeah.
I went, I just always felt like I couldn't talk to people, or I would stumble over my words, or,
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
I would try to go into a conversation and instantly feel like I was blowing it. And so I'd be like, I'm just going to stand here in the corner. And then I'd stand in the corner and feel like a weirdo. Right. So the first 6 months, you know, like the first 6 months to a year for me was very, very secluded. And, just very day by day. And like I said, if they told me to pick up rocks and move from this pile to the other for the first year, like I would have done it. And luckily, though, I did make two or three really good friends who are
Mm,
still my friends today. Like my friend Turtle, he now lives in Jersey, but God, I love that kid, you know, and I made a super strong relationship with him. Same with my sponsor. And, uh, and a couple more people. I don't need to start naming them all, but I
sure.
did make some really key relationships, which was critical, because as much as I was secluded, at the same time, I know I wouldn't have been able to just do it alone. You know, like I
Yeah.
needed other people to bounce shit off of. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, that man, that makes a lot of sense. I think you said it a minute ago. Like, I think part of what you're saying is changing. You're talking about the people, but the people, places, and things to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, like for me, man, like some of my best friends, whether I was really using with them or not, like I really just didn't talk to anyone for about a year. And I did need to be around some people that were trying to do the same thing that I was, and really understood what was going on, and that I knew, like, you know, like my sponsor would be there to support me and kind of give me that guidance. And so I get what you're saying. It's like the pulling away, not in like completely isolating, but pulling away and just kind of finding some new influences, I guess, if anything, and kind of a new team, a new squad, pretty much is the way I was looking at it. So I think that's really awesome, man. Now I want to ask, how did Sober Nation start? Because it basically just started off as, I know, you know, you like writing, and I think it started off as a blog, right? So why did you decide to start it, and how did all of this blow up to what it is today?
You're absolutely right. It started as a way to just express myself.
Okay.
The real story is I was trying to find what I wanted to do.
Mm.
because I liked building houses, but I was 24 years old and I was already really experiencing some back pain. And I told you I had some back surgery. I don't know if that's where I really injured it, but I think just because
Right.
I'm tall and like lean, I just, I don't know. And so I knew that that wasn't going to be my whole life. And my father was, uh, so when you get on an airplane and there's those guys on the ramp, they're throwing suitcases underneath it and packing that's what my dad did for 20 years. And so he had two herniated discs. And I had this
Wow.
terrible fear of back pain because I saw how much fear my pop was in. So,
Sure.
so yeah, like it started because I was just expressing myself. My sponsor bought me this subscription to Success Magazine. And it's so funny because it was only like 10 years ago. But when I say this, it seems like forever ago. Because in every issue of Success Magazine, they had a CD that came in it. And that CD was like an interview. So it was almost like just before podcasts. It was one of the
Okay.
first times where I saw um, just interviews with successful people. And there was this guy on it called Seth Godin, who has since
Mm-hmm.
been like a real hero to me. And in that interview, I just remember listening to what he was saying and listening to his idea about being a linchpin, being something that only you can do that something else needs to be surrounded with. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff. But at the end of the interview, he said, the interviewer asked him, "What's the best piece of advice you have?" Something along those lines. And he said, "Start a blog, don't tell anybody about it, and write in it every day." So I don't know why. I just heard that. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. And I wrote in it every single day. And it was called The Fourth Dimension. And it was on Blogspot. And I didn't tell anybody about it. And after 2 or 3 months, I saw like, what the hell? Like, there's some people reading my stuff. And I didn't even know how they got there because I didn't tell anybody about it. And so that's when
Yeah.
I first just accidentally discovered SEO and like writing content that gets found on search engines when people search for stuff on Google. And and then I started learning about social media and I started coming up with this idea of community. And then again, I was really following Seth Godin, and he has this concept around like an idea virus, right? Where quote marketing is overrated. Like the thing that really spreads ideas is ideas that win,
Mm.
like memetics kind of. And and so I made this decision, and it didn't feel as groundbreaking at the time, but I just came up with this concept that we're going to make it so that it's not about us and it's about everybody else. Because if we tell people stories, I honestly just thought of it like meetings. I really
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
I thought of it like meetings. I just thought if we give people a chance to tell their story, they're
Mm.
going to connect with other people, and then like they'll just spread it for us. And I paraphrase this really quickly, but this whole evolution of what was just my blog into Sober Nation was about 2 or 3 years of tinkering around with ideas and stuff. So I didn't have this like aha moment. It just kind of evolved that way. And then you asked how it blew up and how it turned to what it did, and I'm telling you that's how. I didn't do anything specific about me, and I didn't have some agenda or some idea to spread. I just let other people, I just gave people like an open platform to share their experience, strength, and hope with other people. And like we talked about with the idea virus, the idea just spread. And I'm really, really grateful it did. It's like my most prized possession in a lot of ways. And it's really
Yeah.
cool.
That's awesome, man. I know you've worked on a lot of other projects, and I think it's worth mentioning. Like, this is just how crazy all of this is. And I know I haven't shared this with the listeners before, but the way that kind of it's just a crazy story. Like, you and I linked up. You started a t-shirt company back in the day with like some really cool,
Oh,
like,
I forgot about that.
yeah, like sober sayings and stuff.
Yeah.
And so when you and I linked up more recently, and you invited me to do this podcast, we realized that we had linked up when I had like 6 months sober. So this is like 7 years ago now. And I had sent you a message wearing one of the shirts that you guys had created. I mean, it's just kind of crazy how things come full. So, and then, man, that's an example of like within recovery and in my life today, like I truly believe there are no mistakes. Like, how can that be, you know, how could you plan that out? I mean, it's just kind of an incredible thing. But what would you say the core message is of Sober Nation?
Um, I will get to that real quick story though. That's how my wife and I met in the same way.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
Because
crazy.
it took us a little bit to really figure it out, because I knew that she found me through a blog I wrote on Sober Nation. It was my 7-year anniversary, and I wrote a
Okay.
blog about it. And so she must have been following me. But then, like, after we dated for a while, we really tracked it down. I was like, yeah, but like, how did you find this? Just because, like, the
Wow.
marketing guy in me is thinking the same thing.
Right, right.
And Sober Nation, believe it or not, and a lot of people don't realize this because I don't promote it that much, but it has a huge Pinterest following.
Hmm.
And my wife is like, a Pinterester. Like,
Yeah,
she
yeah.
loves it. And the first time she found me was we were promoting our clothing line through Pinterest. And it took us a while to really like backtrack everything. So when people talk about there not being accidents and that kind of thing, I always think about that story with my wife because she's like the coolest person ever. And without that dumb clothing line that actually at the time, believe it or not, like caused me way more stress than anything else, because running a clothing company is hard. It's not the same as running like a media company. There's like
Mhm.
inventory and
Right.
everybody's got
Order
questions.
fulfillment and
Yeah, and it
yeah.
it, it kind of was a drag. It was great. I don't regret it, but it kind of was a drag. But you know what? Like, all of it was still worth it. So yeah. So, little side note.
That's pretty cool.
And so what did you ask? The core message behind Sober Nation.
Yeah.
We've had the same tagline from the very beginning, and maybe we don't incorporate it into our message enough, but the idea is just putting recovery on the map.
Mm.
This is real shit. Like, everyday people die from overdoses, and even if you don't die, sometimes the consequences are worse because of just what you get dragged through.
Yeah.
And we've come a long way in the last 10 years for sure, and I'm not undermining that, but for the most part, we still see it as this kind of inconvenience almost, because like, oh, like, I wish these people would stop doing this to themselves, and like, yeah, maybe they need more help and maybe they need more resources. And I've never been one of those people that talks about like the stigma quote. Like, I've always felt uncomfortable with that, almost a little bit like poor me, like the world is
Mhm.
stigmatizing me.
Yeah.
And it's not to say it's not an important message. I'm just saying that hasn't been our core focus. Our core focus is just awareness and conversation, because you got to talk about it, because it's
Yeah.
real, it's
It is.
happening, and we need to be upfront about that. And that's always been it. Like, putting recovery on the map. We're talking about it. We're putting it here. Like, this is, like I said, like, this is really happening. We need to address this, and I feel proud about that.
That's great, man. No, I think that's an awesome message. So for
Thanks.
anyone that's watched the show or listened to the podcast before, I'm sure they've caught the advertisements at the end and beginning for Sobriety Engine. So can you tell us a little bit about what Sobriety Engine is, who it's for?
Sure. Well, I am so excited about Sobriety Engine. And last time we talked through a podcast, I think it was when we first started mentioning it. And just let me say that, like, I I went into this really for one of the few times being a little bit selfish. It's always been a dream of mine just to have a membership site. I don't know why. Like, I just think that they're really cool. And I always wanted it, and I always was looking for ways to do it. And so Sobriety Engine really was a way for me to, it started was a selfish idea I had to start a membership site. What it's turned into, and Jonathan, and like Tori knows, especially, what it's turned into is absolutely crazy. Sometimes I go in there, and when I scroll through the real community that these people have built, and like the resources that we provide for them, and the way that it's helping people, like, it blows my mind. And I'm proud of everything. Like, we have real high quality stuff. Like, your podcast, man, the production value and like the guests, it's top notch. And and like the videos that we create and the blog and the directory and like the development work that goes behind this website, it's not easy, and it's really really high quality, like professional top level work that we do. And so for me to feel like so impressed and just blown away to see what has happened with Sobriety Engine isn't an easy feat, because I know what good work looks like. And let me tell you, man, it's the same idea. I went into it with this like selfish idea, and as soon
Yeah.
as I got out of the way and I just let the community take care of itself, the whole thing just completely blossomed. I found out that there's a whole text group of people that met each other on Sobriety Engine that check in with each other every day
Wow.
outside of the platform just because they like
That's
each
awesome.
other,
That's awesome.
so what is it, right? Sobriety Engine, I think we do 2 or 3 online meetings a week. We don't call them AA meetings. It's a pretty similar format because I think everybody's comfortable with that. We call them just recovery meetings, and it has basically a very similar format, just a little bit different so that we don't make anybody uncomfortable. We have a recovery group once a week. The difference is that that recovery group is actually recorded and shared among the community so that they can get resources. The meetings are not. The meetings are private for obvious reasons. We have Omar Pinto. He comes in and does weekly recovery coaching sessions. And Jonathan, they are so dope. Like Omar is such a killer coach, and I'm so
He
glad that
is.
he's part of the community. And
Yeah.
he's like so gracious with his time. We have Monday meditation sessions with Cole Chance, who was on the podcast recently, and
Yeah.
kind of same thing. I was a little bit skeptical. I was like, are we really going to be able to do like meditation sessions digitally and
Mm,
it work? And I've been doing them every Monday for
that's awesome.
like a month, and I feel great afterwards. And they're short and punchy and like to the point, but you see the other people and how they feel and the comments on them. And then of course there's just the daily content that Tori creates, like real insightful questions, real insightful resources that we find, and then not to mention the more in-depth Q&As that we do for real experts, not so much personal stories like the podcast has, but
Right. Right.
real resources and tips and coaching to help people better their lives in recovery. sobrietyengine.com, it's free. We do have a paid option if you want to basically donate if you can. But we decided to keep it open because we want everybody to experience this like awesome resource and community that is building all around us. So sobrietyengine.com, check it out.
Yeah, no, man, it is really incredible, and I actually had the opportunity to go on and do a Q&A, and we talked about my thing, fitness and
Yep.
nutrition a little bit, which was really awesome. And I've seen there's been some really awesome guests coming in talking about meditation and all kinds of different stuff. But I think it's really great because it's it seems like a tighter knit community where in my mind, I think this is what's important to me about it. And you and I talked about this a little bit, but it's more than just the sobriety, right? Like let's really get the most out of this thing.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some other stuff. Like how can we make I'm sober now. Like how can I make my life even better? And I think that's one of the really cool things about sobriety engine. I think what Sober Nation has been doing with that is just really incredible. So I want to ask you, man, because I think we talked about it a little bit here in terms of what you were doing initially and some of the relationships you built. But what does your recovery look like today, and what are you doing to maintain and grow your sobriety?
Great question. I think the most important thing, truthfully, that I do in my recovery is I continue to write a lot. The personal inventory has been maybe not the most important step for me. I think 6 and 7 were probably the most important, but I'd say like the most useful. I really write a daily inventory. I mean, I've missed a few days here and there, I'm sure, but every day. And and when I started doing it, and when I talked to my sponsor years and years ago, he always told me, he was like, don't forget to put things in there that you did well, because as addicts and alcoholics, like we're very hard on ourselves. And
Man, no
that's not the
kidding.
point of an inventory. Like it's not some opportunity to like beat the shit out of ourselves. It's just a
Mm,
way for us to reflect and see if there were instances in which we were selfish or self-seeking. But I like to sprinkle stuff in there that I feel good about or that I feel accomplished by. And then I do my best to sort of make a map for the next day. That really helps me. And I would say, like, perpendicular to that is just living in the moment and living in the day. I really do the day at a time. I practice that. Like this, I think I said this last time, this tattoo I have on my arm, make it to midnight. And that was even one of our shirt designs for New Life. I live that way. If there's ever something really hard going on in my life or anything that is like a real struggle, I don't think about what's going to happen 2 weeks from now or like, what am I going to do at that wedding when everybody is toasting wine and I can't drink? Or what am I going to do when like somebody dies and I'm feeling sad, or like my back surgery, like what am I going to do when I have surgery and the doctor offers me painkillers? I don't worry about that stuff. I plan. I'm not blind to the fact that there's a future, but I really handle what's in front of me and I make it to midnight. And then when midnight comes, I go for the next midnight. And like I really don't live outside of the 24 hours that are in front of me. At least I try my best not to, and I think I do it pretty well. Uh, that's important to me. My fitness is the same thing. My fitness is almost like my meditation. It is my meditation. And I think that's like really important and something that you and I really agree on, where I
yeah.
just think people in recovery lose appreciation for their bodies sometimes because it's like, well, I'm not drinking today.
Mm.
It's still a successful day, which is true, but man, having just the, what's the word, like being able to use your body, having the utility of your body and like your mind and energy with the food that you eat, it's just
Sure.
it makes my life so much better. So
Yeah.
those are the big ones for me, for sure. I take it a day at a time.
That's awesome stuff, man. Yeah, and I think for me, it's important to remember like everything is connected. And for me, I think
Mm.
initially, like I couldn't really argue with all of the I'm into like what the research and kind of science says and stuff, and I was an opiate guy, and I couldn't argue with the research about like how ex-opiate addicts who worked out regularly were staying sober longer, and there were just all these other things I couldn't deny. But I think it is important because you go into the gym or whatever it is you're doing, you're experiencing all these little wins, and you build up some confidence and your body feels better. And I think my main thing was at the end of the day is like, you know I think the way I thought about it, just simply put, was if I feel bad, like if my body feels bad, it could that be like the thing that pushes me to go back and use again. And it's like I
Mm.
couldn't say no to that, like it would be more likely that I would relapse if I don't feel good physically. And I didn't want to take that chance. So I'm with you 100%. Before we wrap up, Tim, is there one piece of advice that you'd like to share with the Sober Nation?
Yeah, I think I just shared it. Make it to midnight. Um, it's saved me endless hours of stress and anxiety
Hmm.
because like there's nothing I can do about the past and there's nothing I can do about the future. It's just, if I stay right here and I look around me, I feel grateful, I feel blessed, I feel calm, I don't feel fearful about the things that I imagine in my head are going to happen that aren't probably going to happen the way that like I'm scared that they will anyway.
Yeah.
So, uh, living in the moment for sure has been like the greatest tool in my toolbox.
That's great advice, Tim. You can learn more about Tim by visiting timstodz, TIMSTODZ.com, or of course you can visit SoberNation.com. Thanks again for coming on the show, Tim.
Oh, my pleasure, Jonathan. Thank you so much for all the amazing work you're doing. Really appreciate it. You're the man.
Be sure to check out the show notes for all the info from today's episode. Sober Nation FM is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Sobriety Engine is a free online community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. This show is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle while supporting your sobriety, you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And again, whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends, follow, subscribe, and leave us a review. Nation, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.